بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين وبعد. So, in today's halaqa, I would like to discuss the concept of Shari'a. Why Shari'a matters, and why is it important? And why do we need to rethink the place of Shari'a in the modern times? So, there are different perspectives on where Shari'a should be in the modern nation state and the modern times. Some people would call to just ignore Shari'a. Why do you bring Shari'a back in? And some people would say, no, Shari'a should govern and should rule everything. And some would say we should just be pragmatic. Just see if Shari'a fits, we bring Shari'a. If Shari'a doesn't fit, we proceed with what we have. Today, I would like to discuss why Shari'a is important in the first place. And for believers, for the Muslims, Shari'a is the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shari'a is what the Quran came to establish for the believers and for the Muslims to act upon. And before proceeding, we need to know what Shari'a is. Linguistically, Shari'a is from the stream of water. The stream of water was called Shari'a. And if we look at the symbolic of that calling, the system or the methodology that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to the people to be Shari'a, it gives us that meaning that Shari'a came to revive people again as if they were dead, and Shari'a is reviving them. Shari'a is like that stream of water that comes to the earth after a long time of drought to bring life again to the earth and to have plants to grow again. Shari'a is that for our hearts. It comes to our hearts in order to bring them to life again, to revive our hearts. So this is the linguistic meaning of Shari'a. But to understand the technical meaning of Shari'a, what Shari'a is, some people tend to reduce Shari'a to just the rulings, the laws of Islam. When you talk about Shari'a, they always go to the laws and the rules. But Shari'a is wider than that. Shari'a would include the creed, what we believe in. Shari'a would include morals, the moral system that Islam came to establish, the moral values that Muslims should adhere to. And also Shari'a includes laws and rules. So all this would comprise Shari'a. In my view, Shari'a should be seen and should be treated as a holistic thing. It is not something that you can just bring separately without the other components. So rulings and laws without the creed and without the moral values, they will be harmful. And any of them without the other will give a distorted image of what Islam is and what Sharia is. So my approach and what I'm arguing here is that Sharia should be viewed as a holistic system. And when we are tackling anything, when we are discussing anything, or trying to understand certain issue according to Sharia, we have to think of Sharia within this picture, that holistic approach of the Sharia. For example, if we take bank interest as an example here and see how Sharia is dealing with that, some people just focus on the rulings of like riba, usury. So nobody would argue that usury and riba is haram. There's no argument. No Muslim would argue that. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made bay', made trade and exchange, buying and selling, halal. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid riba. This is from the few clear verses that talks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed that and made this permissible, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this forbidden. This is from the few examples there in the Quran. So it's clear. So it is not up to us to say, oh, no, riba could be halal. Nobody would say that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made bay' halal and made riba haram. Okay, where the conflict would come, where the disagreement would come, is when we bring a certain transaction in the modern time and try to understand it in the light of Sharia. This is when the disagreement would come. This is when we would dispute. This is when we would disagree. So, to discuss this further and to understand this further, we have to understand many things, and we have to understand also Sharia as a holistic approach. We have to understand the objectives of the prohibition of riba. We have to understand what is the meaning of riba, what constitutes riba, what makes certain transactions to be riba transactions. And we take this and try to apply it to what we have in the contemporary times. Let's look at the transaction at hand, bank interests, and try to analyze it from all different perspectives. And most important for me and for the research I'm doing, that I'm trying to pay more attention to, is the context. We live in the context of the modern nation state that comes with a set of apparatus and a set of institutions. The financial institution is one of them, including banks. And we have to look into that in a way that we understand how the whole system is working, starting from the central bank and all those different types and different brand names of banks and different branches, and how this would work, how our companies are working, how the whole economic system is working, and where are banks from that system. This is not to say again that let's try to make riba halal, and it is not, and also to show that it is not an easy answer to say, hey, this is riba and this is haram. So first, to judge a transaction to be riba, this requires certain knowledge and requires certain understanding of what riba is. And the other layer to that is to understand the context that we are talking about. So we have to have a full understanding of the system within which this transaction is working to see how this functions and how we can judge it based on what the knowledge we have about riba, what constitutes riba, and where is the place of that. And at the end of the day, when we reach that conclusion that yeah, this is identical to what Islam would consider riba, here comes the third layer or the third level of analysis and of judgment. Is it avoidable that we can completely avoid the bank system and function outside the bank system? And this is a question for economists and a question for political scientists to see to which degree, as a Muslim community or as Muslims who live in a Muslim state, how we can avoid and get out or work around the banking system that is there, which is something that if we think deeply about, many of us, or I would say the majority of us, are under this system. If you don't deal directly with a bank, the company or the institutions that gives you your salary is dealing directly with the bank. And subhanAllah, I would see the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he said that whoever would not deal directly with riba, they would get from the dust of riba, which is unfortunately that every single one of us is having to deal with nowadays. So this was one example. I was not trying to give a fatwa about it, I was not trying to give an opinion, but I was trying to say, to set a thought process. How can we think and how should we think when it comes to issues like that? And how to understand the level of complexity when we are discussing those issues, that it is not just an easy thing. You go to the Shaykh and ask him, oh, did our bank interests are haram? And just like the Shaykh is going to say haram, yes, hey, we are done. Or you go to another Shaykh and the Shaykh will say, no, they are fine, there is no problem with that. It is not that easy answer.